Citizenship has continually been contested and redefined throughout history, with not all nations adopting the same view at any one particular time. This video will address how international law impacts statelessness and citizenship through the case study of the Kurdish minority ethnic group. First, an overview of the Kurdish struggle so far. The bordering nations of Iraq, Syria, Turkey and Iran are home to the unrecognised nation of Kurdistan. A minority ethnic group known as the Kurds inhabit this region across all four countries. It is estimated that there are anywhere between 30 to 45 million Kurds who exist within this large area spanning across southeastern Turkey, northeastern Syria, northern Iraq and western Iran. As a result, the Kurds represent one of the largest nations of people in the world without a state of their own. There have been ongoing nationalist pleas to create what will be known as Kurdistan. However, this notion of Kurdish statehood has been repressed by Syria, Turkey, Iran and Iraq, all for various reasons, leaving many people stateless. To exemplify, they were not even classed as being a separate identity from the Turks until 1991. Further, the words Kurds and Kurdistan have previously been banned in any language or dialect within the country. Shockingly, and still to this day, it is still illegal to use Kurdish as a language of instruction in both public and private schools, and is only allowed to be taught as a subject. The Kurds have remained stateless since the beginning of time, and are persecuted by the more abundant Shia and Sunni Muslim-backed governments in their respective nations. So, Kurdish people have no official state and cannot even exercise their customs and traditions, rendering their citizenship useless. TAS 2016 outlines 3 definitions of statelessness within the modern world. These definitions include de jure, de facto statelessness, and additionally a third new approach coined social statelessness. Today, more than 10 million people globally are classed as statelessness according to the legal definition of statelessness. However, it should be highlighted that this number only includes those described as de jure stateless. There is no binding European legislation or agreed definitions of statelessness. Instead, each individual nation has a slightly differing view on the matter, leaving the Kurdish diaspora in citizenship limbo. Article 1 of the 1954 United Nations Convention states that a person who is not considered as a national by any state under the operation of its law is described as a stateless person. The Kurdish people fall into this category of de jure stateless. More than 300,000 Kurds living in Syria today were stripped of their citizenship following Law 93, which was issued in August 1962. Consequently, if people didn't have formal proof of residence, they were designated as foreigners under Syrian law. The concept behind this law was to Arabise northern Syria, or as I think more factual, to decurdify. Many became invisible without rights to travel, education, political participation, legal marriage, or even property ownership. It is estimated that around 750,000 Kurds are without Syrian citizenship today. It is fair to say the Kurds are locked into a prison-like existence in which it is very, very difficult to escape. The United Nations didn't even question the Syrian government on these injustices to the Kurdish people until very recently. Economic and political relations with multiple Syrian regimes were prioritised over saving the unjust decodification of the Middle East. This is yet another example of how flimsy international legislation, such as the 1954 UN Convention, has not been applied in practice. That, though, is the fault of conventions themselves, as they are not legally binding. In 2010, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees stated, "De facto stateless persons are persons outside of their country of their nationality who are unable, or for valid reasons, are unwilling to avail themselves of the protection of that country." This definition is not recognised by any international agreement, rendering the definition useless. For the Kurds, this is especially worrying, as many are classed as de facto stateless and are not protected in the same way that de jure persons are under international law. The 1954 UN Convention allows each nation to decide whether they wish to include de facto stateless persons in the final act. Historically, and even today, Shia and Sunni-backed governments have persecuted the Kurds. Therefore, de facto stateless persons will never be included into their interpretation of the 1954 UN Convention. Some Kurds could be considered to be refugees under the Refugee Convention, yet none of them can actually exercise this right as they effectively possess citizenship in Turkey, Iran, Iraq or Syria. They do not regard themselves as Iraqi, Turkish, Syrian or Iranian, but officially they have citizenship in their respective nation. This is not just an issue isolated to the Kurdish diaspora. It is an issue of global prominence, which millions of people endure, including the Palestinians, Chechens and Tamils. This is another example of how international law leaves the Kurdish people exposed and stateless. De jure and de facto statelessness treats statelessness as a problem that affects one's individual citizenship, ignoring the fact it affects a much wider, larger group of people. On the other hand, social statelessness takes the collective element of citizenship into account. Social statelessness understands that you can feel stateless due to oppression and alienation from society. Possessing legal documents of a state means nothing when you and your people are outcasts from your host nation. The Kurdish people feel as though they are living in a diaspora, regardless of where they reside or hold legal documentation to. The current terms recognised under international law of de jure and de facto are not broad enough to explain the tensions and problems the Kurdish people face on a daily basis. Thus, many Kurds have unwillingly left their homeland to live in the diaspora in nations such as Germany and the UK. Whilst they are not persecuted in these new nations, they often have a weak connection with the host nation, even when they are granted legal citizenship of their host country. The lack of robust and binding international protection on the security of citizenship means increasing numbers of Kurdish people feel insecure and that they are living in disparate conditions. To circumvent millions more minority ethnic groups experiencing citizenship insecurity, the definitions of what statelessness is must be expanded and implemented into international law. From there, the law must be followed and policed by all nations in order to preserve the rights of all minority ethnic groups.
Created using Powtoon.